Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Have you ever woken up to a crisis because a number on a dashboard is broken and no one knows why, or sent out frustrating Slack messages trying to find the right dataset, or tried to understand what a column name means? Our friends at Atlan started out as a data team themselves and faced all this collaboration chaos. They started building Atlan as an internal tool for themselves. Atlan is a collaborative workspace for data-driven teams, like GitHub for engineering or Figma for design teams. By acting as a virtual hub for data assets ranging from tables and dashboards to SQL snippets and code, Atlan enables teams to create a single source of truth for all of their data assets, and collaborate across the modern data stack through deep integrations with tools like Snowflake, Slack, Looker, and more. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Atlan today, that's ATLAN, and sign up for a free trial. If you're a Data Engineering Podcast listener, you get credits worth $3,000 on an annual subscription. When you're ready to build your next pipeline and want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With their managed Kubernetes platform, it's now even easier to deploy and scale your workflows, or try out the latest Helm charts from tools like Pulsar, Pachyderm, and Dagster. With simple pricing, fast networking, object storage, and worldwide data centers, you've got everything you need to run a bulletproof data platform. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode today, that's LINODE, and get a $100 credit to try out a Kubernetes cluster of your own. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Lior Gavish, Lior Solomon, and Atul Gupte about the technical, social, and architectural aspects of building your data platform as a product for your internal customers. So, starting with you, Lior Gavish, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lior. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Monte Carlo, the data observability company. Before that, I used to run engineering at a company called Barracuda. I built machine learning applications for fraud detection. Very excited to be on the show today.
And Lior Solomon, how about you?
Hey guys, thank you for having me. My name is Lior Solomon, VP of Data Engineering at Vimeo. Spending the past 10 or 15 years as a VP of Engineering in different startups.
And Atul, how about you?
Hey everyone, my name's Atul. Thanks for having me, Tobias. I am currently a product manager at Facebook, but prior to this, I have built and managed several data products at Uber. This included products in the data science space, machine learning, analytics, as well as data cataloging and metadata management. Excited to be here today.
And going back to you, Lior Gavish, so you've been on the show before, but for anybody who hasn't listened to the previous episodes you were on, if you want to just share a bit about how you got involved in data management.
So I got involved in data management basically as part of my work trying to build products in the cybersecurity space. So you all know this, but security is data heavy. And some of the most interesting developments in recent years have been around how to better leverage data in order to detect threats and block them in real time and understand their impact. And so building out those data-intensive machine learning-based systems really required building out a data platform, a lot of capabilities around collecting different types of data sets and kind of synthesizing them and putting them together in different ways to both solve some of analytical use cases and also solve some real-time mission critical machine learning based use cases. And so that's how I got really excited about building data platforms and data management in particular. And I've been specializing in it ever since I started Monte Carlo 2 years ago. So very passionate about the space.
And Lior Solomon, do you remember how you got involved in data management?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's from two different angles. Mostly, I spent in startups focusing on the aspect of collecting user behavior data and turning it into insights and basically, helping to improve the user experience. So it was a lot of interest on the data collection kind of product perspective throughout my previous role in video ad tech company named LiveView, which was, that was my experience in regards to the high volume data collection, third-party cookies and all that fun. Seeing a huge, scale of billions of events coming a day. And then, from an ad space into Vimeo and kind of combining those two worlds of high volume at scale and also, improving the very much a consumer-facing app. That was my journey and what created my curiosity and passion in regards to the data and then, usage of data.
And Atul, how about you?
Yeah, so my journey was sort of similar to Lior S's, but it was more on the gaming side. So I started my career at Zynga, and there I witnessed firsthand, collecting large amounts of user behavior data, right, based on events that we were hoovering in. And I saw how product managers were using that to determine what features to build, what things to optimize. And I saw that there was a gap there, right? There was definitely things that could be done to make this easier for not just product managers, but others in the org to truly understand how to build better games. That's where my interest started. And I kind of went from there over to Uber to build these platforms at large scale.
That brings us to the overall topic of conversation about the overall idea of a data platform and treating it as a product. But before we get too far along, I'm wondering if we can just build some consensus about the definition of that term data platform and what that means for the organization and the technologies involved and the overall set of capabilities that we're discussing.
I think one of the biggest challenges when we try and define a data platform team, first of all, understanding what sort of challenges they're trying to solve and to contain the scope of work of that data platform. Because specifically in Vimeo, what we define a data platform as being that their mission statement is to build real-time centralized data collection pipelines and consumption frameworks at scale. So as you can see, but just by the mission statement, mostly about the real-time aspect of it. I guess we can talk, later on about is that necessarily the only definition of a data platform? Is it necessarily just real time? Could it be also in regards of ETL and batch processing? But from our perspective at this point, in Vimeo, we saw that challenge in helping product teams and engineering teams that are not necessarily familiar with the intricacies of real time processing, helping them first of all to actually make sure that we provide that sort of service and frameworks to be able to release their products and use that kind of capability.
I think my view is similar, but slightly more expansive, right? So I would say a data platform seems like it's a collection of internal tools, systems, technologies, frameworks that are all interconnected somehow, right? Either at the data layer or more commonly at the workflow layer. So if your workflow spans multiple tools, technologies, and they all rely on each other to derive an insight or to drive a business outcome, I'd say maybe that could be a data platform. So slightly more expansive than I think what Lior just said, but in the similar vein.
And I agree with everything that's been said. And I'd even add that the conventions and methodologies and people processes that exist around the infrastructure and tools is actually part of the platform and actually defines how the platform is going to be used and leveraged. So it's a combination of people, process, and technology that every organization designs a little bit differently in order to accomplish the goals that have been set forth for data insights, for machine learning, for other kind of data applications.
The interesting aspect of the sort of platform part of the terminology is that it sort of implies a certain expansiveness and sort of holistic approach to the data. So I'm wondering if somebody says, I have a data platform, and really what they have is a Postgres database and a BI dashboard, does that count? At what point can you say, I have a data platform, and are there sort of limitations or requirements that you would place on being able to use that phrase in reference to the tools and processes that you're building on top of?
That one's tricky. I think what you're essentially saying is there a critical point in time when what you have becomes a platform versus just a collection of tools, or maybe just a single tool or a single process? I think all data platforms start that way. I don't think you ever go in building this giant monolith that has 10,000 different pieces. So I guess it's just a matter of semantics. You call it a data platform when you think there's a vision and you're executing towards it. Perhaps that's a good way of putting that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach. And I was kind of trying to throw some contrary perspective in there to see how I can take you off guard. And so I agree that, nobody says, I just built this data platform in a day and you have, all of the bells and whistles. It always starts out as, I need to answer a question. This is the, first step to be able to get there. And then you kind of iterate on that. And so in terms of the actual platform and the evolution of that, who do you view as being the main stakeholders in the platform and its use and its sort of design and care and feeding?
It's mostly, in our case, product managers that, all the way from the moment they have an hypothesis and they want to start working with the engineering team, supporting them to actually use the right data collection frameworks that we provide, making sure that they have the best practices to understand in which cases should they use one framework versus the other. We have the actual engineering teams that uses the data, to process it or make sense out of it, or just like stream it towards other workflows. And obviously analysts, consuming the data into dashboards or just like, using it downstream. In our case specifically, it's also going back to my definition of a data platform team. It realized there's like different downstream teams or data engineering teams that are consuming the data from real time. We have a BI engineering team that focuses on the data warehouse aspect and the ETLs and ELTs. So they're like another team that consumes data from the data platform team. I think that another observation I want to make is that data platform team in our case is actually mostly focused on the infrastructure and focused on the frameworks that you will use in order to stream the data. They were trying to minimize their engagement in regards to like certain metrics and having the understanding of the business metrics or any discussions in the level of like an analyst or a PM trying to make sense of the data. They focus solely on the engineering at the scale and making sure the SLAs are met. And therefore, we have other data engineering teams which are a little bit closer to the matter or the subject matter and can help, debug certain data discrepancies or anomalies or helping building aggregations or making data more accessible.
I wanted to add just maybe two things there. So I think, Lior, you covered sort of these two categories, right, where you're saying the people who actually rely on the insights derived from the platform, most likely that's PMs or like someone in the business. And then you also mentioned about people who build using the platforms, right? So the data scientists, data engineers, analysts, depending on the company. I think there's two other categories. One is the people who build the actual platforms themselves, the engineers, the PMs who design it, etc. And the other category, which I think sometimes is overlooked, but tends to be important, these are the people who actually administer or fund the platform. So this is like, the VPs, the CIOs. I like to call them the people whose names show up in the New York Times article when there's a breach, right? But I think they're very important stakeholders because they sort of determine the funding levels, the technology choices sometimes, and also help evangelize it within the organization. Because more often than not, your data platform starts out as this little thing that then grows. And so you really need that evangelization. So I think those are the only two things that I would add.
The data product managers that build the platform, I think. We mentioned the data engineers building the platform, and then there's, of course, the data product managers like Atul, who define the requirements and really help develop a platform in a direction that makes sense for the company.
To your point of having sort of product managers involved and iterating in a particular direction, this goes back again to the question of what's the point at which you can say that I have a data platform versus a collection of tools. And I think that that's really where it comes down to is having that core vision, having an overarching and cohesive plan for how those tools fit together to be able to interrelate versus I have system A over here where I can answer some questions, but then when I need to be able to iterate on something there, I go over to system B, and then I need to go to system C to make other changes. And so it's this discrete sort of choppy workflow where you don't have one continuous flow from an idea through to delivery. You need to be able to kind of context shift and jump around a bunch of different places. I think that that's really the core element of what makes something a platform versus a bunch of technology that you try to throw at the problem.
Yeah, I think it's the point, almost by definition, it's the point where things can be built on top of the platform, right? Like that's the definition of a platform. The point where if you're trying to build a new use case or answer a new question, you don't start from scratch and build a completely new solution, but rather you build on top of the tools that have already been put in place and have already been integrated together in order to help you accomplish that goal. And sometimes maybe a Postgres database and a BI tool is all you need to get to that point. So I don't think it's necessarily about how sophisticated or fancy the technology is, but more about at what point it becomes usable to address, a broad range of use cases that the team has in a way that's effective, that's fast, that's reliable, that's secure. I think those are some of the things that a good platform will help you do.
Just wanted to add to that is I think another challenge that, we're seeing is providing that best practices and just having that clear guidance of like which tool, or like, if it's a data collection framework, or in what cases would you use one versus the other. Some of the challenges we're seeing is that it's really, from a lineage perspective, it's really hard to anticipate who's going to use a framework. Like if you can hand off a framework to a certain stakeholder, they can start working on it. But in a larger engineering organization, you end up someone, like downstream, a team that uses the tool that you provided for a complete different purpose. And you realize it just after the fact. I think that's like another challenge that, looking into platforms like Monte Carlo to be solving, to help you actually identify when someone is like picking up a certain data stream and shifting it completely to a different use case. And sometimes, against the guidance and best practices the data platform team provides. I think that's another challenge. So my point is that I think part of the definition data platform is a lot of documentation and a lot of like, making sure there's like training and kind of like distributing that concept and vision to the rest of the teams. Otherwise, as the company scales and the engineering team scales, it's really hard to kind of like control that.
And in terms of actually establishing and driving the overall vision of the data platform, who takes that responsibility, and what are some of the technical and organizational constraints that are likely to factor into how that design takes shape and the overall goals of what the platform is intended to achieve?
Maybe I can get started on this one, but would love to hear the thoughts of the Liors. I think as a PM, I can talk about what I've observed as a PM, right? I think a large part of it does depend on those stakeholders that I mentioned, the people who sort of greenlight these efforts and fund these efforts, right? They need to help act as evangelists, because you might see the smattering of platforms or a smattering of, tools or systems that, you as a PM say, yeah, clearly there's a platform here that's waiting to be formed, or like there's guardrails that need to be put, whatever. But I think a large part of the challenge that you see is adoption, right? How do you convince different teams to sign up for this vision and to maybe stop using some of their cobbled together tools and instead use your cobbled together tool, right? How do you make sure that they're, signing up to pay that productivity tax, as it were, right, for not using something that they're so used to using? And this could be sort of an external platform. It could be like an external tool versus using something that's homegrown or something completely different from the workflows that they're used to. So in terms of who owns the responsibility, I don't think there's sort of one person or discipline that I could point to, but I think it definitely is a partnership between the team that decides to build and own this platform, more likely sort of the product leadership, the product engineering leadership there, and some sort of sponsor higher up in the organization that can help drive adoption and evangelize at that level as well. But that's kind of what I've observed. Curious what the others may have there.
I think what I've seen is this thing evolves and matures, right? The people that actually build the first versions of a data platform might actually be the single data engineer, data analyst they're starting the data function in a company, right? And they own the data platform. They set it up in a way that allows them to work effectively. And then as the team grows, the data platform evolves and becomes more powerful. And at some point, you start seeing a dedicated platform team, kind of like Lior S described, where you start seeing pieces or parts of the system being owned by one particular individual or by a team that adopts it. And then eventually, maybe one day, if you're lucky enough to grow the Uber scale, you have a set of product leaders and engineering leaders that own it together. And I think it's the natural evolution of how these things get built out. And that needs to adapt to what the company needs, right? Like the more use cases you have, the more investment in data you have, the more scale, organizational and data volume scale that you have, the more you need to assign clear ownership and formulate a clear vision for the platform and invest the resources in building it out and making it useful for all the stakeholders, right? It's not easy. Atul, I'm sure you have a lot of horror stories. It's not easy to get a lot of different stakeholders that have their own ways and own tools to adopt something. And in order to accomplish that, you need both an investment in a platform that is robust and that adds real value, and you need buy-in and evangelism from the top leaders of the company. And I think it's just a process. In terms of the constraints, I think the organizational constraints that we've all talked about matter a lot from a technical perspective. I think some of the things that really impact the way the platform evolves are the skill set of the people that are building on top of it, right? Like you build quite a different platform if you're trying to help analysts that love SQL build dashboards versus if you're helping machine learning engineers bring real-time machine learning use cases to production versus you're handling real-time analytics, right? So you really need to think about who the people that are building on top of the platform are and what sort of technologies they're used to using. Do they like SQL? Do they like to write Python notebooks? Do they like to write Spark jobs? And really adapt the platform to what the intended use case is. And of course, you need to think about the data sources you're going to consume. Where are they coming from? How are they structured? What level of control you'd have over that over time? And as well as, real time versus batch, machine learning versus analytics, and all those different aspects of what the data platform needs to deliver in order to be valuable.
And on your point of the machine learning and real time versus batch and analytical, what do you see as being kind of the breaking points at which a single platform is not able to deliver on all the different use cases and you need to build out separate platforms for specific purposes? Or do you see that as sort of the overarching goal of one platform to be able to deliver on all the possible applications of data within the organization?
I mean, I'll invite Lior and we'll comment on it as well. But my sense is you get the most leverage if you're able to create a consistent platform. Let's think about real-time data, right? Real-time data is valuable, but even if you have that use case, it's very likely that you're going to have some batch processes that are using the same data, right? And so you kind of need to support both in the same platform. If you start splitting it into different platforms, you're losing some of the economies of scale and some of the consistency and some of the argument to even use the platform in the first place. And same goes for machine learning, right? If you're building models on top of something, it's very likely that you also need analytics on top of it. And so splitting that out into a completely different platform kind of loses some of the value, at least in my opinion. Not to mention some of the kind of horizontal functions of a platform if we're talking about observability, discoverability, security, and access control. All of these things, are much more valuable when they're consistent across multiple different use cases, as opposed to kind of being part of separate systems where you need to kind of rebuild all of these building blocks fresh. I don't know if you guys would agree. I'll invite you to challenge that.
Actually, I would say +1 to that. That's exactly what we observed at Uber. And that's kind of what I've observed at other companies that I would partner with. Insights I'd like to understand how they build a particular product or space. I'll give you an example of the real-time space at Uber itself, right? We used to have a standalone system and product to handle these real-time use cases. And exactly what you said, Lior, happened. Teams wanted observability. Teams wanted to combine that real-time data with batch processes. They wanted to use some of our metadata management systems with these real-time systems. And instead of having to build all of those things separately, by integrating it with our existing querying systems, our existing data cataloging systems, it actually made usage much easier. It increased usage, and we actually got much more value out of those real-time systems than we would have if they were standalone, right? And I think that argument applies to pretty much all of the examples you gave, whether it's data science, whether it's machine learning, because a lot of the platformy components, right, like the security, the access controls, observability, the ability to debug something, you get those for free by partnering with the platform, right? I mean, I say free, but you see what I mean. And customers are increasingly demanding that. So instead of having each team kind of build this out themselves and exist in a silo that doesn't work with any other silo at the company, I think there's much more value in that initial friction to combine, integrate. And again, it goes back to sort of the definition of data platforms that we all spoke about earlier, right? Which is, what is a platform? If there is some workflow that can be orchestrated across everything, if it's relying on the same sort of underlying tools, technologies, or frameworks, I would argue that that kind of fits the platform definition. And so it makes sense to leverage the strengths there. So yeah, TLDR, that was just a +1 from me.
I'm really curious about how you guys think about the fact that some of those data platform tools, they actually bear for a different data engineering skill set, or it's a complete different stack. For example, you would have data platform tools that are focused on in our case, Kafka consumption, creating consumers, and versus, having DAGs running on tools that support DAGs to actually create great expectations, maybe test cases, or providing, any sort of processes around Airflow. I'm wondering from your experience, do you envision in your world all those disciplines are actually and experiences are actually happening in one team, or are they spread to different skill sets or different data platform teams?
I can maybe venture an answer because we've dealt with some of these challenges at Uber. I think when we started out, it was a whole bunch of separate, disparate tools. But what we found much more success with was to provide different levels of views for different disciplines and skill sets, right? At Uber, we had this unique problem. I'm not sure how widespread it is everywhere, but I definitely feel like it's a little unique, that we had a lot of different people from a lot of different skill sets trying to access the same data or derive the same insights. And so what ended up happening was we created these different levels of views that you could use based on your skill set. So if you were an amateur SQL programmer or you didn't understand too much, but you really wanted to use those insights, you could leverage some pre-built components that were there to sort of plug and play these components and build, whether it's interactive dashboards or sort of solutions where you can just use the insight and run with it. But if you were a data scientist that really knew what you were doing and truly understood which query you wanted to run or which DAG you wanted to manipulate, you had that access as well. So yeah, I know it's really high level and we can definitely go deeper, but I think that was the value, right? So by getting everyone on the same platform, we were able to foster this sort of collaboration, right? Where data scientists could build something that's complex, share it with an analyst who understood a little less but wanted that insight, who then shared with a PM who only cared about whether the number went up or down, right? But they were all operating on that same data set, the same dashboard, the same sort of underlying asset, right? This made managing these things much easier. It made troubleshooting much easier. And now there was a single source of truth for this data, right? All three disciplines were now operating on the same ground reality. So I think that was very valuable. It was not an easy task. It took us a while, but we found that the dividends that it paid off were tremendous.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with this. I think there will always be different people using different technologies to manipulate and access and derive insight from data, and that's perfectly fine, even within a single platform. I think the role of the platform is to make sure they're all looking at the same data and are working consistently and are able to find that data consistently, right? So, for example, Lior has mentioned there are Kafka streams and there's some batch processing. That's perfectly fine, and there's likely different people using those different technologies. But for example, something that the data platform can make sure happens is that if there's a certain data set that's flowing through Kafka, it also ends up, for example, in the data lake or the warehouse, so that it can be queried in batch jobs by people with different skill sets, and that there's also enough metadata to be able to determine that a particular Kafka topic is also related to this particular table on the data lake or the data warehouse. And this is a very kind of tactical example, but I think these are some of the things that a good data platform can make sure happens at the foundational layer so that the people using that data don't have to work really hard to have the same source of truth, the same information, and work consistently across the company.
In terms of the overall aspect of the technologies that are used for being able to build out a data platform, as we discussed at the beginning, a lot of times you start with one small use case, a small subset of the tools that you're going to end up with, and you need to iterate on the stack and sort of have this overall vision for how it's all going to tie together. And one of the conversations that's been happening a lot recently is the idea of this so-called modern data stack, where a lot of times people will say it consists of things like Fivetran with Snowflake and dbt and Looker is sort of the happy path that a lot of startups are going down. And for teams who are early in their journey of building out a data platform and establishing the overall product vision and goals, I guess, how much credence do you think we should be giving to these conversations about what constitutes the so-called modern data stack, and how much variance do you think we should bring into that conversation to fit different needs versus trying to push everybody into this one sort of uniform strategy of how to build out the foundational layers of their platform?
It's a controversial question, guys. At least my 2 cents, right? I think we have to be careful about mandating one particular technology as part of the stack. All vendors, including Monte Carlo, would love people to do that, but I'm not sure there's a single answer to all data problems. I think some of the concepts behind the modern data stack are very, very valuable, right? I think using cloud services that are managed and scalable is super, super important, and that's going to radically accelerate the organization's ability to innovate with data, right? Anything you can do to choose a solution that lets the team focus on building insights and doing kind of core business work rather than building infrastructure and kind of quote unquote dumb pipes is very, very valuable, right? And the companies that you mentioned, Fivetran and Snowflake and Looker, all help you do that. There are also other vendors that will help you do that. And you need to think about it in the context of your business requirements, your technical requirements, and where the rest of the company runs. Like, for example, if you're running all of your applications on GCP, then it might make sense to use BigQuery and not Snowflake, just because it'll be much more operationally efficient to do so. And there's a lot of knowledge in the company around it, right? So I don't think there's like one solution. I think the concepts make a lot of sense. And I definitely go for a kind of a cloud-based, managed, scalable stack every single time. That's a no-brainer. But choose the vendor that makes most sense for what you're trying to solve in the environment that you operate in.
It really matters on the scale, like how big of a company we're talking about and how much engineering kind of resources you have to throw into the problem. If you're definitely, I would argue that, for smaller companies, first of all, when it comes to serving the different business departments, like finance or CRM or marketing, trying to move their deliverables, try and provide whatever tools are off the shelf to let them kind of like drive their insights and drive their deliverables, like in an autonomous, as much as possible, it to be free, not be dependent on data engineering. So definitely, we're validating different managed ELT tools that, Fivetran or Stitch, definitely it can help there. And kind of try and contain the data engineering efforts mostly on the bigger problems, the more where scale is a challenge. And actually, like where, you need a little bit to support more of the data science or machine learning engineers to actually drive the deliverables. They need a little bit more attention than those like more of kind of like the business metric aspect where it can be just self-serve through Snowflake. I think when it comes to data observability, definitely thinking about like tools that can help you identify and monitor any sort of like, freshness issues and anomalies, having something there in place makes sense. And also from a data collection perspective, having a clear framework of like, what is the organization going to be using in order to collect data? And also to classify when we collect data. I don't think that even there is like one tool that serves it all. Depends, like, in my mind, I break it down into like, transactional kind of data could have one type of pipeline. User behavior data could have a different type of pipeline. These are, they have different SLAs in my mind. And yeah, it's like, I personally think that like spending the time trying to engineer towards the tougher problems makes sense versus trying to reinvent the wheel, where there's like some tools that are off the shelf. You can just like use them, go for that, and keep your engineering force for tougher problems for the organization.
And so for a new team who is thinking about building out their platform, and maybe they already have an existing set of tools that they've been leaning on to be able to answer questions in the early days, or maybe it's an older company and they're just working on trying to tie together all the disparate systems that they're dealing with, what are some useful strategies that you have found for being able to either build or buy their way towards a more well-integrated platform that fits this sort of product vision that we've been discussing?
So as you're thinking about whether you want to expand what you have, whether you want to acquire new solutions, from new vendors, etc., I think you do need to think very carefully about the inherent costs and benefits of each approach, right? It might appeal to purchase a lot of like standalone separate platforms, thinking that, hey, like these platforms have already done all of the hard work, because often the fit and finish of these platforms is going to be far superior to what you could stand up internally with a short amount of time or resources, right? But there is a price that you need to pay for sort of integration, making sure that everything is compatible with everything else, making sure that things flow well, making sure they appear in the right places. And the other thing is that, when you do purchase a platform or an external solution, it may not always meet very niche use cases that you may have. It really is important for you to truly understand, like, what is your use case? How niche? Is this something that needs to be this niche? And I think that will help you answer your question on what should I pursue? Should I just expand what I have because it's working well enough and I just want to make it better? Or, sort of cut what you have and acquire a solution that exists. I think there's value in doing both, because using a solution that's pre-built by sort of seasoned practitioners has a lot of value. They've spent a lot of time. The fit and finish is going to be great. You're going to have sort of a dedicated support function and use cases and all of that documentation, everything is going to be available, but it may not fit like this crazy small niche that you have. And so I guess no easy answer. It just requires some careful thinking here.
I think migrating from an existing stack to a new stack is always a very, very difficult decision. It can have a lot of benefits. I talked to a lot of companies that have, for example, made the transition from an on-prem data warehouse to kind of a modern stack, if you will. I think by and large, you hear about dramatic acceleration of data initiatives and dramatic acceleration of the ability to really use data. So there's definitely a lot of value there. Having said that, those are complex and long projects that can take many months, sometimes years to accomplish. And so you really need to think carefully about how much rope you're going to get as a data platform, right? Like, for how long are you going to get the funding and the focus and the attention on doing these migrations and rebuilding your platform, essentially? And if the answer is yes, I have the backing, I have the support from leadership, from other teams to really invest in this, then you can jump leaps. But if the answer is no, like in a few months, people will be frustrated and the project will be dropped and resources will be taken away, then it's probably not worth it, right? So it's always a complicated question that it also ties to higher level business objectives and leadership perspective.
I think it's also it's really important to define, like, if you do go and pick up a certain tool, you're going to pick up a new infrastructure or a new kind of like a new platform, even if you're buying versus building it, it's really important to understand what's the first use case or business use case you're going to be using in order to show the impact, understand and set up the expectations of, what are they exactly trying to improve, try to contain it for that specific, group, and be very attentive to how effective it is. Because as this becomes a success story, it's really easy to kind of like celebrate it to the organization and get more teams to be onboarded. And it's also to actually helps to set up the expectation with leadership in regards of like, it's worth investing that direction. We already have a success story. Here's how we actually move the needle. And, that's how you get the buy-in from the rest of the teams. And also in some cases, like it's always a little painful to move kind of like certain payload or certain like workflow from one pipeline or one infrastructure to another. One thing that worked for me before is actually, introducing a carrot at the end where like, if you start using this infrastructure, you get out of the box those set of features that does not exist somewhere else, and slowly kind of like motivating the teams doing that shift to being your voice within the organization and actually motivate the rest of the teams to follow that pattern.
Are you bored with writing scripts to move data into SaaS tools like Salesforce, Marketo, or Facebook ads? HighTouch is the easiest way to sync data into the platforms that your business teams rely on. The data you're looking for is already in your data warehouse and BI tools. Connect your warehouse to HighTouch, paste a SQL query, and use their visual mapper to specify how data should appear in your SaaS systems. No more scripts, just SQL. Supercharge your business teams with customer data using HighTouch for reverse ETL today. Get started for free at dataengineeringpodcast.com/hightouch. Going back to the question of scaling the platform, there are a number of different ways that we can think about scale, whether it's the scale of the underlying technology for being able to deal with volumes of data. It could be organizational scale of being able to support a wide number of users. It could be scale in terms of the range of features that it supports. I'm wondering if you can just talk about some of the ways that data platform teams should be thinking about scale as they're building out their solutions and selecting the underlying technologies and trying to promote the platform within their organization.
I think there's a point in time where some deliverables from the data platform turns into a real data product. And in that case, it makes sense to kind of offload the whole kind of like onboarding to that data product to a different team. Because otherwise, you spread to so many different directions that data platform team, if there's like more and more kind of like features they introduce to the platform or tools they're introducing, at a certain point, they'll be stretched so thin that it'll be really hard to anticipate what sort of volume of requests they're going to get and how much adoption they're going to get into each one of those like features or tools that they introduce. So I think it's really important to kind of identify adoption, identify how many consumers we have for any given features or tools that the data platform team is providing. At a certain point, ask yourself, like, are we in a position where this is like a substantial, is this like a product that we want to try, like offload to a different team. And in my mind, from my experience, it becomes like one indication for it's about time to do so is when the discussions becomes much more about the business impact and the type of data that's streaming through those data tools. When the discussions are becoming a little bit more high level in a product or a business initiative, then I think it's a good time to actually offload it from data platform, let them focus on the engineering aspect of it, the infrastructure aspect of it, and let a different team just like handle that.
Absolutely agree. I think very similar to what I've observed and experienced at Uber as well around, you start out a data platform. This is something that we built, a hosted notebooks product. Sounds fairly pedestrian vanilla, but the features and functionality that were added to it attracted an audience far greater than what we initially started out to serve. So initially, we just wanted to make data scientists' lives simpler. We ended up serving a lot of customers because they were able to adapt the platform to their needs. And you suddenly ended up in a place where, these very disparate audiences wanted very different things out of their platform. Some wanted things that were like plug and play, sort of what you see is what you get editor kind of experience. Data scientists wanted access to complex infrastructure, GPU farms, and things like that. And I think that's where I think what Lior said made absolute sense. Like you need to start figuring out, okay, which users do you really want to focus on? Which parts of the product do you want to hive off into other systems? Are there better solutions here? Can I buy something? Can I build something? So I guess, Tobias, to answer your question, I think the scaling of technical complexity seems to be the harder problem, I would argue. I think some of the other things, whether it's infra capacity or like usage, I think those are things that can be managed in other ways. But I think technical complexity, that's the one that requires the hardest conversations.
I'll add to that. I agree with all of this. Certainly a challenge to manage all the different use cases that emerge and figure out what you're going to support and what you're not going to support, or how you're going to support the things that you don't want to focus on. I'll also add a couple of other things that we've seen emerge as data platforms scale. It's just the sheer complexity of the number of sources and data sets that are produced from them and the number of people that's involved that creates the kind of horizontal challenges. So we touched on them in the past, but observability and discoverability, right? Like, so, as long as they're like one or two pipelines or 10 pipelines, pretty obvious how you'd make sure that they work and how you guarantee the SLAs and the reliability around them. It's overall pretty easy to find what data sets are produced from them and which ones should be used for different purposes. As the platform scales, it becomes really challenging because any change in any piece of the puzzle, whether it's a source that's changing in some unexpected way or pipeline that's been modified and had some unintended consequences, all of these things can create downstream reliability issues, right? And that's kind of where observability comes. That's why we built Monte Carlo. And then similarly, every new piece of data that's created creates discoverability issues. So like, how do you make sure that that data is available to all the people that could make use of it? How do you make sure that they know about it and don't create their own version of it, which in of itself creates complexity and confusion in the organization. So all of these things probably are not super important in the early days of a data platform, but then become much more important at the later stages as you scale.
And so going back to the question of treating the data platform as a product. So we've discussed about some of the organizational aspects, what it is to even have a data platform, some of the ways that the components fit together in this cohesive whole, and some of the sort of stakeholders and responsibilities involved in making this happen. But when it comes to actually treating it as a product, above and beyond just having a data platform, what does that entail, and sort of what is the meaningful distinction between a data platform versus data platform as a product?
When you get to the point where the discussions around like how would we be using that data and what sort of data sets we're going to be enriching, what sort of decisions we're going to be making out of that product, and which use cases we're going to be actually using that, I think that's in my mind when it becomes like more of a data product. I have one example where we built a data collection framework we call internally a big picture, where we're letting PMs create schemas that defines the type of data or data points they want to collect throughout the apps. To do that, there's there are discussions about like how should we model the data, like what sort of events should we have and how should we design them, and it also influences the data model downstream in the consumption level. At that point, I think it's like more, that's the point where you want to start understanding the problem and providing the guidance, which is beyond of like how would that scale, beyond of what infrastructure should we use in order to scale the volume of events that we're going to be collecting. In a nutshell, it's like, in my mind, it's just like it goes back to the question of like the essence of the data. So there's one thing building a pipeline and making it scale and make it performant versus the data that streams within that pipeline. When you start handling and discussing what's the data that streams into it and to what sort of workflow or what sort of product you're using it for, I think that's one way to start thinking about it as a product.
I agree with what you said, Lior. And for me, the distinction is a data product is something that you build and gets used by other people, right? Like I could go anytime and create a notebook and, write a prototype of my fanciest ideas on how to do machine learning on our data sets and explore the data in various ways. And as long as it's my notebook that I've been playing around with and that I'm learning from, it's not a product. And therefore, there aren't any kind of stringent requirements on it other than I should probably not destroy the warehouse or the cluster while doing so, right? The moment I take that thing and kind of, wrap it so that other people in the company can use, maybe I'm exposing it as a dashboard that other people are going to use every day, or as a model that is going to, make predictions for a certain application, or even if it's just a data set that other people are going to use to build their own products, at that point it becomes a product. When it becomes a product, there's some responsibility that goes with that, right? It's like when we build, software products or consumer products, right? You expect the thing to have certain SLAs. You expect it to have in the data. You expect it to have certain SLAs. You expect it to be documented, right? To be well understood, like where is it coming from? What does it do? What does it not do? What it is and what it is not. You expect it to be findable and discoverable, right? You expect it to have the proper permissions and the proper governance, right? Like you don't want to expose, all of your users' BII to everyone in a company just because it's part of your new product, right? So for me, that's an inflection point. If you're going to expose it to others, it needs to hit a certain checklist of expectations, and what they exactly are depends on the use case in the company and a lot of other things. But you need to have that checklist and make sure that the boxes are ticked. It's no longer, Lior's personal experiment. It's something that's going to be used widely and therefore has to meet certain criteria.
As you mentioned, there are a lot of other requirements that come in when you start to treat it as a product versus just a technical capacity. To your point of SLAs and the sort of reliability of the system, what are some of the ways that you determine the level of success of the data platform and its product-oriented nature, and some of the ways that you sort of justify the time and expense that goes into building and maintaining this system for the purposes of the organization?
Can kick this off because I've tried a bunch of different approaches in the past and there's some that have had some success. So I think one is you truly need to understand what is that data platform trying to do, right? Is it improving productivity for some cohort of people? Is it helping with cost? It's got to be helping with something, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be building, managing, and maintaining it. And so there were sort of two approaches that I've tried. Some have failed and some have worked. One is to try and peg it to the success metrics of whatever you're helping solve. So if you're building a machine learning platform that is designed to, reduce fraudulent behavior, your success could come from sort of this fraudulent behavior that you've prevented from happening, right? It's like the cost savings, stopping bad things happening, essentially. Like, how have you done that, or how well have you done that? That could be one way of doing it. Another approach that I've seen that has worked well is to understand what is the unit of business for the organization, right? So let's say you are a food delivery company. Maybe the unit of business is the number of deliveries you make or the amount of money that you make on each delivery. And then sort of breaking that down to say, okay, what can the data platform do to make this more efficient, right? Can it make deliveries faster? Can it make deliveries cheaper? Can it make customers happier? Whatever that is, and demonstrate how the data platform helps drive that. So something that we've done was to identify this unit of business and see how much does it cost to run this data platform to deliver that unit of business. And as business grows, so as you deliver more units of business, if the cost goes down for your data platform while you're still delivering the same or more value, then that is a measure of success, or that could be a measure of success. So yeah, it's a little harder to do with the data platform because you're so far below the actual business, right? It's hard to demonstrate that impact, but there are ways. Some could be a little more convoluted, but there's definitely avenues here. I'm curious if that resonated at all with the others as I explained.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's like making sure that, there's a clear understanding of the type of problems they're trying to solve and trying to tie them up as much as possible to business objectives. Like, for example, like if the data platform is focused, let's say for, I don't know, for next year, just on real-time analytics or real-time streaming, what's the availability metrics? What's the, what's the ingestion kind of latency or consumption latency that we commit to? And to continuously track those sort of like metrics. It will also help you a lot to see when the team is actually trending in the wrong direction, to slow down with committing to new features and actually making sure that you're paying that technical debt versus, committing to more features and more fancy tools on the data platform. So having like those SLIs and SLOs is really critical. On the flip side, I would say that it's really tough to sense those data tools, sometimes different components, and having holistically them all kind of like provide like some kind of a North Star to say when should we slow down or when can we be more ambitious about more features. It's a little tricky. But, I really believe that just the intent to continuously look at those, like build those metrics, that's part of the mentality or, it's an exercise that's really important to be doing.
There's definitely a lot of other directions that we can take this conversation, and perhaps we'll have to reconvene for a deeper dive on some of these subtopics. But in each of your experience of working with and building out data platforms and building out products oriented for data teams and end users of data, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've each learned in the process? And Lior S., why don't we start with you?
I think it goes to my previous point about like, first of all, just like keeping track of who's using which one of the data platform tools or features that we provide, and making sure they're equipped with the best practices and they're sharing the ownership and accountability of those like metrics that they follow. Because you turn your back and you suddenly realize it's like a terrible incident that is caused by a team that uses something that a different team created, and then it ties that back to the data platform team. So to make sure that whomever is picking up any of the tools, any of the features from data platform, they have like some sort of cadence or shared accountability where they meet together and they look into the metrics, they provide feedback as users of the platform, and we can continuously iterate and improve on it. And to make sure that they, whomever they're handing that data or who's there downstream is continuously using it, following those best practices.
How about you, Atul? As far as your experience of building and managing and evolving these data platforms, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned?
I think as we designed, built, and managed these data platforms at Uber, we saw how they could truly democratize data and insights. I know that word is overused, but I really saw how that worked. We built numerous internal tools and solutions, and we found that even though we targeted these towards some of the more technical users in our audience, right? So the data scientists, the data analysts, maybe even the engineers, we saw a lot of less technical people start to adopt these tools because they discovered the power that they had to derive these insights from underlying data, because those insights were what helped them drive their function forward, right? That function could be marketing. It could be, in Uber's case, like working with our drivers and other partners. But we saw that these tools could really improve their efficiency, their productivity, and sort of the quality of results that they could drive. Basically, these products really empowered this generation of users that weren't really, the focus of these products. And so we kind of made these people more data literate. We infused sort of more data thinking into processes that may not necessarily have it. And I think it was a big plus for the organization, right? It truly demonstrated the value of a well-built, well-designed data platform. It got us a lot more funding, a lot more visibility, and proved that data platforms are here to stay. I think for me, that was truly transformational, like seeing how that can truly help the business move.
Lior Gavish, how about you?
For me, one of my biggest learnings was that data platforms are complicated and can go in many different directions. And so one of my biggest learnings was if you are investing in your data platform, I think it's worthwhile hiring people like Atul, like Lior S., that really have, a profound understanding of how the platform is used and can really narrow down the scope to the things that really, really matter and focus priorities there. I think that's how you get the most out of the resources that you're investing into the data platform, and can also get to some of the the outcomes that Atul just described, where the data platform actually becomes a force multiplier for the entire organization. So, but to do that, you need to be very focused and really understand how the system gets used.
As far as the overall trends in industry and the organizations that you've worked with, what are some of the elements that you are keeping an eye on specifically for the purposes of helping your organizations and your customers build out meaningful data platforms that can help to power the organizations that they're intended to support?
I think there's something that Lior has touched upon that I think is very relevant, which is insights about data in motion. I think a lot has been done about data at rest, batch data processing, and things like that. I think it's fairly mature, although there's always new innovations coming out. But I think for data in motion, it's very new. I think organizations are still trying to understand how they can use these signals, how can they leverage them, how can we build standardized tools that help extract these insights and this value from this data. I think for me, that's the most exciting space. And a close second is sort of machine learning based solutions. I think the word ML is thrown around quite a bit with a lot of different solutions in a lot of different contexts. There is true value to machine learning when used and applied in the right way to the right problems. And I'm seeing that more and more organizations that are trying to leverage this as a tool or as a solution. I think for me, these are the two most exciting things to basically monitoring and extracting insights from data in motion and applying the power of machine learning to truly make a difference, positive difference, hopefully.
And are there any other aspects of this topic of data platforms and building them out as a product and helping organizations be able to realize the potential value of their data that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I'd probably echo what Lior said. Data platforms are complex beasts, and they can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. There's truly value if they're well designed, well put together, and they empower the right people in the right way. And so definitely a topic that you can go really deep in. Each subsection of the data platform has its own sort of backstory and value chain. I'd just say that.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with any of you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you each add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And so now for the final question, what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today?
It's really interesting to see, right now we're really trying to look into the concept of data enrichment in real time. And then when you think about those concepts, you have suddenly a lot of the business logic that used to be downstream around the world of ETLs and the data warehouse suddenly goes more towards the real-time pipeline. And I'm curious about from a data observability and anomaly detection, how that's going to be working more on the world of real-time. There's plenty of tools when it comes to data at rest. I'm more curious about what sort of standardization is going to be around the real-time world.
I'd say that there's a lot of different tools and solutions out there. And I think one of the challenges that I see is that they're all built off of very separate bases. And so, it isn't very easy to build interconnections at the platform level unless the systems themselves offer these integrations and sort of plugins or extensions. I find that could be a tricky bet. And I think that's the challenge that I see in the space.
And Lior, how about you?
Observability, which is something I spend most of my days on. I think one of the challenges that I see, I speak to a lot of companies that have some amount of legacy in place. And I think to really get the benefits of a data platform, you kind of need to start centralizing things and making them part of the platform. And so one of the biggest gaps is how do you really bridge the two? How do you get efficiently from running some of your analytics on SAP and Salesforce and really switch to a more kind of modern stack that still allows everyone in the company to benefit from data. So I'm not sure how to solve this, but I know this will be useful.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time today to join me and share the work that you've each been doing on building out data platforms and helping people be able to gain value from the organizational data that they're collecting. It's definitely a very complex and pertinent problem that all of us are facing. So thank you for taking the time to share your insights on that. And I hope you each enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having us, Tobias.
Thanks, Tobias.
Listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.